With me, Cathcart Spindlebeam. Today, I'm afraid I can't read you Lady Chatterley's Lover, as was previously advertised, because I was reading through it just then, and it's absolutely filthy. I was just reading a bit of this stuff on the back here about D.H. Lawrence. He wrote this story book in 1928. But it was so filthy that it was instantly banned. So he gave up writing, abbreviated his name, and bought a delivery man's hat. So today, instead of D.H. Lawrence and Lady Chatterley's Lover, I am going to be talking about the Altec 436B or C compressor, and also the EMI RS124. Now that's all a bit of a mouthful, so from here on in I'm going to refer to it as the Altec. No, I'm not. When I was putting this studio together, I wanted to try and avoid as many plugins and computer cheats as possible. And I thought to myself, what a wonderful world. And then I thought to myself, how can I achieve this? Because, as I say, everybody uses computers and all in the box and all that kind of thing. And I thought, well, it would be nice to make some of my own gear. So I thought, well, I'm going to try and make a compressor, because I've always been fascinated by compressors. So I started making some of the sort of like the lamp-based ones with a light-dependent resistor and a lamp in it. There was a couple of designs I found in an old book from Mullard, and they're obviously they're called automatic gain control circuits, so that's what they are. And they worked okay, but they were a bit noisy, and they were kind of all sort of a bit although they're very, very, very nice, but very trashy. So I threw them in the bin. And then one day I found an illicit schematic online of the EMI RS124 compressor. And I thought, hang on a minute, this doesn't look too crazy. And I thought, maybe I should try and make one. But then I thought, well, I've never made anything with valves in it before. Or had I? Because I'd remembered that I had basically rebuilt my Onduline from scratch and drilled all the holes in the metal and done all that in the chassis, all that sort of thing. So I thought, oh yeah, so I did that and that works okay, and it's only tried to kill me 4 times, so I'll try making this thing. So what I did is I got this schematic and worked out what bits and pieces I needed, and I got all the components on my workbench and left them there for 2 years, all connected up, but I was too scared to plug them in and switch it on. And then 2 years later, so 4 years after that, I decided to switch it on and found that the clone RS124 Altec that I had made passed a signal and sounded really nice and clean, but it didn't really do much in the way of compression. So I thought, oh, okay. So I put it to one side and left it, and then came back to it another day when I was about to take it to pieces. I thought, I'll just try it one last time. And I put in, unbeknownst to myself, I put in a very loud signal, which people who come here and record sometimes complain when I'm sending them headphones. I just do it for a reaction, really. So anyway, so I sent this very loud signal through the thing, and all of a sudden I heard a gain reduction, and then the sound started creeping back up again. And I thought, oh my God, it works! So anyway, so I found I didn't have to do much more to it, so I got it all plugged in and started using it, and it was great. And I couldn't believe how easy it was. obviously I needed to have a bit of knowledge behind that to have actually done it in the first place and know what's going on. So I wouldn't advise the average person to just say, I'm going to build a valve compressor, because if you've never done anything like that before, you'd probably kill yourself. Anyway, this is the thing that I built here in this black box. If you can see here, it's called the Lobster. It works very well. In fact, you might be able to see it working now. There's a VU, which stands for virtually useless meter, and you can see my voice going through there, and every time I say something, this needle goes down, and I'll explain in a second what's going on there. As I say, it works very well. It works kind of, well, pretty faultlessly, really, apart from now and then when I have to hit it, which is quite remarkable, really, considering how it looks like a monkey built it, if you look at this photo. Anyway, it worked so well that I thought, well, I'm going to build myself another one. So I did. So under this sheet over here is the Lobster 2. That one's not plugged in at the moment, but that one, strangely, even though it's built in exactly the same way as the other one, it doesn't sound quite the same. It still does the same thing, but it's got a slightly different tone to it. So as I said, the Lobster 1 and the Lobster 2 are based on the original RS124 schematic. Now, I would become embroiled, is that the word, in deep doo-doos if I were to start showing you the RS124 illicit schematic, because it shouldn't really be there. I think it's always protected by all sorts of copyrights and things, well, as most things are, I suppose. But also there's a company called Chandler Limited who might want to have a word with me, because they make a very good clone of the, well, it's actually a complete replica. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a clone, it's a replica of, an official replica of the EMI unit. But a bit of history, basically, the RS124 was originally made. It was originally an Altec 436B compressor, made by the Altec company in America, and EMI bought a few of these units in 1958, and they found out that although they did work very well, they didn't do exactly what they wanted them to do. So they did a few modifications to them, and the Altecs then went from this green-looking thing to this grey-looking thing. And it had one or two extra dials on the front, but it was all very simple. When Altec heard that EMI and various other people had been modifying their units, they decided to modify their own units, and they came out with the Altec 436C compressor, and that's the diagram that we have here. Now, I got this diagram off of a very good website called Sauter, or Sauter, I'm not sure how you're supposed to say it, but sauter.co.uk, which incidentally is the company that makes the wonderful audio transformers that I use in my Lobster. If you look at this drawing here, the non-technical people amongst you might look at that and just go cross-eyed, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but basically a very quick rundown is sound goes in there, goes through this input transformer here, through this little thing here, which is a dual gang potentiometer, which is an input control. The sound goes into this gain stage here with a dual triode valve there called a 6BC8. Before I start talking about valves too much, if you would like to know a bit about what valves actually are and how they work, go to this link now, because it's the best one I found online so far, and it really taught me a thing or two. So, at the moment, the signal is going into this gain stage here, which basically makes whatever goes there slightly louder. Not massively louder, but a little bit louder. Then, to make it even louder, it goes into this gain stage here, which is another dual triode, which is a 6CG7 valve. And then it goes through this output transformer, and then that's connected to whatever it's connected to, like a mixer or something like that. So that there, from there to there, is basically just an amplifier, a line amplifier. So it's not doing any compression at all. Now the compression bit is quite clever here, because what happens is when the sound is entering here, it goes through there, and then it's tapped off here on these two wires, going through these capacitors and into this here, which is a dual diode. And what this does is this turns the AC of the audio signal into a DC voltage. So it's a small AC voltage is the signal, and then there's a DC voltage here. And again, you can read about this in the link I've put underneath. How does it change AC from DC? Well, for purposes of this video, just take my word for it that it just does. So you've got a DC voltage here. There's actually a negative DC voltage because of the way that this is set up and biased, whatever it is. So every time a loud signal goes through this valve, it goes down here, converts it into DC, so it's into a negative control voltage, and that voltage goes negative. I think it goes down to something like negative 30 volts. So a really loud sound will make negative 30 volts. And then the DC goes back up to here, and then it sort of infiltrates the secondary winding of the input transformer. And then what it does, this is the really good bit now, it affects the gain of this valve here. So at the moment there's sound going through here, it's immediately gone down here, and then it's gone out of this, back up to here. And so what happens is the sound is initially goes through there, gets through, but then is automatically compressed. Because what's happening is this valve here is what they call a vary-moo valve. And a vary-moo valve is a valve that gradually switches on, so it's got like a nice curve to how the amplification starts on it. So when the audio reaches a certain threshold, which is fixed in this model, it gradually comes on, as opposed to one that comes on very, very abruptly and very sharp, and you can see a couple of drawings here and here. So this one is the standard valve, which sort of comes on pretty abruptly and wouldn't be any good for this machine. And then here is a vary-moo valve, and you can see the graph there showing that it's a gradual inclination up to the top there from minus 30 volts. So that's that. And so basically every time you say something into here, you can see now with this VU meter, this VU meter is linked up to the vary-moo valve and the recovery capacitor, which I should point that out, that is here, the recovery capacitor. So once it's done its compressing, it reaches the threshold of compression, and then it goes through this, so it charges the capacitor up. When it goes back down below the threshold of compression, this capacitor then discharges. And what EMI did, which it's sort of there, but it's not quite the same. EMI did a design where they had a stepped recovery mode switch, which is what I've got on here. So you can change the time of that recovery. So I can't remember how many seconds it is, but for argument's sake, say the first one is like 20 milliseconds, and then the second one is like 50 milliseconds, and the third one is whatever. And that's done by a lot of resistors here, which, if I just find my other bit of paper, there is a drawing of it just there, redrawn from the EMI one. I hope you haven't lost me yet. By the way, if you're finding this very difficult to follow, or you know much more than I do, and you say, well, I could explain that much better, but I'd still like to learn more, go to our members area and you will see a detailed description of how an actual RS124 or an Altec 436C works, which was written by a good friend of ours called Matt. It's read by the lovely Louisa. Okay, where have I got to? So the sound's gone there. So my voice is here, and I'm going to say the word bottom. And bottom is in that, and then it's in there at the input level, and then it goes into this vary-moo valve to here, tapped off there instantaneously and then goes back into it pretty much. So it sort of feeds back into it with this negative voltage that causes the gain, the amplification factor to lower down and then rise up again when there's a loud sound. So when I say the word bottom, let's look at this VU meter now. So here we are. Bottom. Bottom. Now, if I keep saying the word bottom and I now start moving the recovery position, you can see that the recovery time changes. So here we've got, that's the fastest one, and if I switch it on to the next one, it's bottom, and then bottom, 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 and the last one, bottom. Lovely. Oh, okay. Now, a cool function that the EMI put on this was the hold function on the recovery dial. And what that does is it arrests the discharging effect of the timing capacitor there, so all the electrons have got nowhere to go. So when it goes into hold mode, it's basically gone down to the compression level, and then when you put it in hold mode, it gets stuck and it can't go back to the top. So if you look here now, and if I look back at the VU meter, and if I just say the word lobster, and then I'll put it into hold, I'll say lobster, lobster, lobster. In fact, I will say that, and then in the middle of saying that, I'll put it into hold mode, and you can see what happens. So here we go. So lobster, 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 lobster. Oh, lobster, lobster. So that's in hold mode now. So what's happened, as I said, is the timing capacitor has now been stopped in its tracks, and it can't discharge at all, which is quite good, because with this Altec design, you get a quite abrupt initial, quite punchy transient at the beginning of each sound that is then compressed. So it's really good for things like drums and basses. The idea with the hold control is that you can smooth out the initial sound of something. So if you're sort of playing a bass line into it or something, whether and it's going boom, 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 boom. If you just play a bit of it, put it into hold mode, and then play it again, the boom, 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 boom will be smoother. It won't be like that. It will be like do 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 do. If that makes any sense. So anyway, I'm going to put it out of hold mode now. If you just want to look at that, and you'll see what happens. That capacitor is a bit fed up now. So now it's out of hold mode now, and all the electrons are now flowing. In practical use, this design has given rise to the very, very punchy bass sounds. If you listen to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the whole album, I think all of the bass tracks on that were recorded through an Altec, RS124, and you can hear it's like got a real kind of transient, beginning to the note, and then like a nice sort of smooth after, transient and then smooth, and also drums sound fantastic through this. And what happened in EMI studios in the 60s on the four track recording console, on the output bus 1 and 2, which was fed usually to tracks 1 and 2 on their 4-track machines, they had 2 of these Altecs inserted on the 1 and the 2 bus, so basically track 1 and track 2, because I think it was all hardwired. They couldn't patch it out to different tracks. And then track 3 and track 4 had a Fairchild 670 across it, so that was two Fairchild 660s, I think, maybe, I can't remember. But the 670 is a stereo one and the 660 is a mono one. They tended to record all of their rhythm tracks through channels 1 and 2, which had the Altex on, and most of their vocally stuff through the Fairchilds. Now this compressor does work quite nicely with soft, just like a little compression. And here's an example of the compressor being used in a very subtle but quite effective way. Firstly, you'll hear a section of an incredibly boring rhythm track as it sounded through the studio desk. It's just drums with a bass playing. This is before any compression is added, and then you'll hear it switch over to the sound as it sounds through the Lobster, so it's sort of like glued together, and the Lobster was set on a medium input level and medium fast recovery time. I should say as well that the threshold on this and the attack are kind of fixed, but they're also program dependent. So you can kind of, if you just sort of put in a little bit of signal there, you can hear my voice has gone down a bit, so I have to kind of turn the signal up a bit there. But as the input control goes up, the amount of the threshold and the attack alter a little bit, not massively, but they do a little bit. But one thing they did find with this is when it was being used in a very subtle way, you would get little thumping noises, basically when the vari-mu valve was going in and out of its gain reduction job. So it would go as it was going into compression and out of compression. EMI devised this unique balancing circuit that would enable the engineers to balance the two halves of the input, the dual triode there. They just managed to balance those two there, and that got rid of the bumping as well as it could. It was always still there, but it was very, very quiet. I haven't bothered putting that in mine because I'm finding that most of the time I use this thing for quite loud noises, and I can never hear any kind of bumping stuff. You can, as I say, if you turn it right down and try and sing through it sort of softly, you can hear occasionally like this. Couple of other little things on this one. When I first built this, I missed a resistor out from this section, from the recovery section, and it made it all sound very big and loud and distorted. But I quite like that. So what I've done is I've put in a 1 meg ohm bypass switch there, which if I just speak into that, now it's gone like that, and then back again, which is probably not particularly good on my speaking voice, but in a second I'm just going to play some drums and stuff through there and you'll be able to hear it. Don't worry, we've nearly finished. Right, I'm going to do some drum stuff now because I'm sick of talking. Here is some drum noise things. This is with the input control quite low, so if I gradually increase the input control, okay, and then if I then start playing around with the release time, did you hear all that? If I start playing around with the release time, you can hear that it kind of extends the residual sound of the cymbal there. So I'll put it back to the fastest one. By the way, I'm playing these drums on a keyboard with my left hand, and they're not very good. So I apologise that they're all out of time. I hope you've enjoyed this video of me doing this stuff here on the showing off the Lobster and the Lobster what it does, and I mean, it's not really a Lobster, it's really an RS124, but I just called it a Lobster, you know, because I quite like lobsters. Next video is going to be all about the Gen Carousel C450, and that is a rather cheesy sounding organ, but with a Gen CX2000 synthesizer built in, and it's really good. So hopefully you'll be tuning in for that one. Do all the old like and subscribe type thing, and as I say, there's a members area as well, which we've got all sorts of extra stuff in. So from me, the Lobster, it's good night.